Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman. For many of us, our very first introduction to these legendary heroes wasn't on the pages of a comic book or projected on the giant screen of a movie theater, but on the small, intimate screen of our living room TV. It's a little hazy, but the first time I was exposed to Superman and Batman was through the DC Animated Universe, or DCAU. In this iceberg, I'll be covering every major entry into the DCAU, some of the most notable names attached to the project, as well as a bunch of trivia, theories, and more, all getting more obscure the deeper we go. So get comfy, this is the DCAU Iceberg. Tier 1, BTAS. Batman the Animated Series, often shortened to BTAS or BTAS, was the very first entry into the DCAU, premiering on Fox Kids in 1992. It was heavily inspired by the Tim Burton live-action films and was meant to capitalize on their popularity, while also emulating the 1940s aesthetic of the Fleischer Superman cartoons, aiming for a timeless look with police blimps and a film noir color palette. This cartoon would end up being the foundation for the DCAU, its 85 episodes over 2 seasons, building out a rich tapestry of Gotham heroes and villains with unique psychological profiles. It featured the iconic performances of Kevin Conroy as Batman and Mark Hamill as the Joker, two voices that would become synonymous with the characters for an entire generation. STAS. Superman the Animated Series, abbreviated as STAS, is the 1996 sequel series to BTAS that follows Clark Kent's adventures as Superman in Metropolis. Building on the popularity and positive critical reception of BTAS, it expanded the DC Animated Universe, focusing on introducing other heroes that teamed up with Superman through the 3-season run, like Flash, Aquaman, and Kyle Rayner Green Lantern. It kept the blend of 1940s and modern aesthetics and cemented the DCAU as more than just a single cartoon, but instead an interconnected universe. This was also the first piece of DC anything I ever watched as a kid. I had the first 3 episodes on VHS presented as a movie. Man, I must have watched that thing 100 times. It cemented in me a lifelong love for the character of Superman. Bruce Timm. Bruce Timm is the artist behind the iconic and timeless style of the DCAU and served as head producer on many major shows within the universe. He was a writer, artist, director, and animator at various different stages across the DCAU's 15-year run. He's also the co-creator and producer of Freakazoid, Green Lantern the Animated Series, and a handful of other DC animated movies during the 2010s. Timm is often credited as the creative mind that spawned the entire DCAU, and while this is an exaggeration, his fingerprints are over almost every single corner of it. Justice League. After introducing both Batman and Superman, the next obvious step was, well, Wonder Woman, actually, but they just skipped ahead to the entire Justice League. Premiering in 2001, the show lasted for 2 seasons and showed the adventures of the 7 founding members of the League: Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, The Flash, Green Lantern, Hawkgirl, and Martian Manhunter. With such a large roster of heroes, it greatly expanded the world of the DCAU. Batman Beyond. Sandwiched between BTAS, STAS, and the eventual production of Justice League was the studio-mandated Teenage Batman cartoon. When Bruce Timm, Paul Dini, and Alan Burnett received this request, they were stumped. They wanted to keep the continuity they created with BTAS, but they'd very clearly shown that Bruce Wayne did not adopt the Batman persona until adulthood. The compromise they came up with, a young Batman of the future with an elderly Bruce Wayne as his mentor, would eventually become the animated series Batman Beyond. Running for 3 seasons from 1999 to 2001, this show followed Terry McGinnis as the Batman of Neo Gotham, as he battled against new villains like Ink, Shriek, and Blight. Tier 2. Justice League Unlimited. After the success of Justice League and what was intended to be its finale, Cartoon Network wanted more, and so the DCAU continued with a new show, Justice League Unlimited. After the departure of the founding member Hawkgirl, the League collectively agreed to expand their ranks, opening up to accept more heroes from all over the world. What was once a 7-man team quickly became a global task force of superheroes. Some notable members include Green Arrow, Supergirl, The Question, Black Canary, Huntress, Dr. Fate, Captain Marvel, The Atom, Booster Gold, and countless others. While the original 7 still remained the center of season-long arcs, new heroes each got their own spotlight for short periods. With the end of Season 3, JLU ended, and along with it, the DCAU proper. Harley Quinn. The court jester-inspired, wacky, femme fatale sidekick to the Joker, Harleen Quinzel is an extremely popular character today, but unlike most DC characters, she did not debut in the comic books. Harley was created for BTAS, and after she spiked in popularity, her character was expounded upon, showing her origin as a psychologist that was manipulated by the Joker, their abusive relationship, and her attempts at emancipation and rehabilitation. If you like Harley, any version of her, you have the DCAU to thank for her creation. Paul Dini. If Bruce Timm is the originator of the DCAU, then Paul Dini was its lifeblood. Serving as producer and writer for every series before Justice League, he wrote and edited many of the scripts of the most iconic episodes. His name is almost always used in the same breath as Bruce Timm, and his writing talent spread to various other projects, such as Star Wars: The Clone Wars. He even penned the story for both Batman: Arkham Asylum and Arkham City, both of those video games. Caped Crusader. Batman Caped Crusader is a 2024 animated series produced by Matt Reeves, J.J. Abrams, and Bruce Timm. Clearly inspired by the DCAU through visual flair and Timm's style, this is a completely separate continuity with different depictions of Batman as well as his villains like Two-Face and Harley Quinn. The reason I've included it here is because it so closely resembles the DCAU and has Bruce Timm as producer. Caped Crusader is what we would consider DCAU adjacent, but decidedly is in a different continuity. Mr. Freeze. Much like Harley Quinn, if you like Mr. Freeze, you have the DCAU to thank. While the character did exist before BTAS, he was completely different. He was a nameless villain that originally went by Mr. Zero, and he carried a cold gun, and that was it. That was his whole backstory. BTAS introduced the identity of Victor Freeze, and the now legendary backstory of his wife Nora being cryogenically frozen, Victor's tragic descent into villainy, all of it. TNBA. The New Batman Adventures, or TNBA, is the sequel series to BTAS that featured several prominent changes to the art style, as well as introduced a new Robin, Tim Drake, that featured far more prominently than Dick Grayson had in BTAS. As it turns out, this was a mandate by WB, who wanted to increase the appeal of the show to children by having Robin appear more often than before. The thinking is that eventually this led to the creation of Batman Beyond. TNBA is slightly controversial among DCAU fans for the changes made to the character designs of the villains. All of these changes were made to reduce the effort of the animators, streamlining details and simplifying costumes, often to the detriment of the artistic designs. I think the Joker got it the worst. He's missing so much of his sauce of the BTAS look. Anyway, TNBA takes place concurrently with STAS, and the two even crossed over a few times. Tier 3. The Timmverse. This is an alternate, unofficial title for the DCAU, named after Bruce Timm. It's used by some fans, and of course his art style is the staple of the entire universe, but it diminishes the efforts put forth by Paul Dini, writer Alan Burnett, and countless other writers, artists, and voice actors. Plus, it's far less explanatory for anyone who doesn't know the behind-the-scenes details of this interconnected cartoon world. DCAU is clear and to the point. Mask of the Phantasm. Batman: Mask of the Phantasm was the first feature film in the DCAU, exploring more of Batman's personal history and his battle with the new villain, the murderous vigilante Phantasm. With the return of Batman's lost love, Andrea Beaumont, and an exploration into the criminal background of the Joker, this film serves as an excellent character study of Bruce Wayne and a fantastic entry into the Batman mythos. Static Shock. Created by writing legend and founder of Milestone Comics, Dwayne McDuffie, Static Shock was a 4-season animated series that started in 2000, following the adventures of teenage Virgil Hawkins during his life as the superhero Static. Static Shock was the first animated series starring a black hero, and is fondly remembered by fans at the time. Originally a completely separate continuity, the show was eventually folded into the DCAU during the second season, not dissimilar to how DC Comics absorbed Milestone. Seeing Static interact with the Justice League was a ton of fun, and a cool instance of retroactive continuity, as the first season of Static Shock is technically DCAU canon despite the fact it was never intended to be. Bruce and Barbara. In BTAS and TNBA, we see Batman foster the next generation of heroes, including Tim Drake Robin, Dick Grayson Nightwing, and Barbara Gordon Batgirl. Dick and Barbara even eventually strike up a romantic relationship, which is great. It's a ship a lot of people enjoy seeing. What is less great is that Bruce Timm has a particular preference when it comes to Barbara Gordon's romantic life. He likes to pair her with Bruce Wayne, the adoptive father of her boyfriend, who is about 20 years older than her. Yeah, it's really weird and uncomfortable, and unfortunately, it is canon to the DCAU, as their relationship gets mentioned in Batman Beyond by Barbara, who is now the commissioner of Neo Gotham. So, do with that information what you will. Superman 64. Superman on the Nintendo 64 is infamous for being a contender for worst video game of all time, alongside real stinkers like E.T. on the Atari. It features the art and voices of DCAU Superman, Lois Lane, Lex Luthor, and a handful of others. The primary gameplay revolves around soaring around a very low-poly metropolis with terrible tank controls, aiming to fly through rings on an unforgiving timer over and over and over again. Justice League versus the Fatal Five. This is the latest entry into the DCAU, a film released in 2019 that takes place after the end of Unlimited. It includes a crossover with the Justice League of the present and the Legion of Superheroes from the far future, while also serving as a sort of origin story for Jessica Cruz, Green Lantern, and Miss Martian. There are some odd continuity questions. Miss Martian is the most glaring one, as J'onn J'onzz, the Martian Manhunter, was very clearly stated to be the last surviving Martian during the premiere of Justice League. Tier 4. Mystery of the Batwoman. Released in 2003, this DCAU film follows Batman and Robin as they try to stop the Penguin from trafficking weapons, while uncovering the identity of the new Gotham vigilante, Batwoman, who mysteriously appeared recently. They come to blows because Batwoman claims to be dedicated to justice, but does not care about Batman's rule to never take a life. 3 different women are introduced throughout the film that Batman investigates as possible culprits. And if you haven't seen the film yet, I won't spoil it for you, but it does kind of have a neat twist, along with some pretty funny scenes where Batman silently intimidates some criminals. Super Cheekbones. This one is in reference to Superman's face in the first season of Justice League, where his cheekbones and general facial structure seem unrecognizable to his appearances in STAS and later seasons of Justice League. It's not a great look, but the idea was to make him seem older and more weathered after the events of the STAS finale, where he was left to clean up the mess left by Darkseid and restore his reputation with the world. The design was reverted after fan backlash, which I think was the right decision. Return of the Joker. This was a Batman Beyond movie released in 2000, where the Joker from Bruce Wayne's time had mysteriously reappeared in Neo Gotham. In this film, we get to learn what happened to the original Joker, as well as Tim Drake, and we get insight into Batman's final battle with his arch nemesis. This is one of the darkest entries into the DCAU, delving deep into ideas of child abuse, body horror, and generational trauma. but in my opinion, it is the best that Batman Beyond has to offer. It was after this film that I really felt like Terry had finally inherited the role of Batman from Bruce. What's interesting about this film is that it was actually delayed 2 months from its planned release due to how violent it was. Because of this, there are actually 2 versions of the film, each with slightly different language and an altered final fate for the Joker. Gods and Monsters. Justice League Gods and Monsters is a 2015 film that follows the Justice League of an alternate universe. Here, Superman is Hernan Guerra, the son of General Zod adopted by humans. Batman is Dr. Kirk Langstrom, Man-Bat in the regular DCAU continuity, who has been transformed into a vampire. And Wonder Woman is the Fourth World new god Becca. Together, this alternate version of DC's Trinity face backlash and public distrust from a world that does not like them or what they can do. The film was written by Bruce Timm and Alan Burnett and has Timm's signature DCAU style. Even though it's not canonical, it slots in very easily as an Elseworld story to the DCAU. I really like this film. It's super cool to see these different versions of the characters and all the little nods to longtime DC fans. Definitely check it out if you haven't heard of it. Bat Embargo. The Bat Embargo is a term used to describe an order from DC and Warner Brothers that barred the use of the majority of Batman characters in the DCAU, save for Batman himself. Robin, Two-Face, Ra's al Ghul, nearly every major Batman character was off limits. The reason for the embargo was the then recent release of Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins and the new Cartoon Network program, The Batman. DC Comics writer Paul Levitz was the one behind the embargo, worried that seeing 2 different versions of the Joker on screen would confuse children. For some reason, this rule didn't apply to Batman himself, or lesser characters like Clock King or Professor Milo, Batman and Harley Quinn. Much like JL vs. the Fatal Five, this is a movie released in 2017 that is considered a late addition to the DCAU canon, taking place at some point between Justice League and Batman Beyond. It follows Batman and Nightwing teaming up with Harley Quinn to track down Poison Ivy and stop her latest plot to release a deadly virus on humanity. The film is odd, to say the least, and really, really horny, including a scene shared by Harley and Dick. I haven't touched on this much yet, but Bruce Timm seems to be very interested in upping the sex appeal of his projects. Maybe as a part of his own personal interests, probably that. I don't know. On to the next one. Tier 5. Lex Luthor Foreshadowing. In the second season of Justice League Unlimited, we learn that the Kryptonian supercomputer Brainiac has infected the biology of Lex Luthor, transforming him into a grotesque bio-android with protruding hunks of technology sprouting from his body. While this was an incredible twist and a fascinating direction to take Luthor in the following season, it was also retroactively foreshadowed years prior in an episode of S-TAS where Brainiac shoots Luthor with a stray laser. This single innocuous shot, only a second long, was brought up by the writers in a pitch meeting for this season of Unlimited and became the basis for the Brainiac twist, the moment where he infected Luthor. Little details like this are why I and so many others love the interconnectedness of this universe. Mr. Freeze, Sub-Zero. Another movie, but this one is interesting. Released in 1998, it was meant to take place between the end of BTAS and the beginning of TNBA, showing Batman and Robin tracking down Mr. Freeze to the Arctic after he kidnapped Batgirl, hoping to transplant her organs into his comatose wife Nora to save her life. They rescue Batgirl, but in the chaos, Freeze is knocked into the water. It's revealed in the end that Batman found an organ donor with his money from Wayne Enterprises, and Freeze survived, crying tears of joy, seeing his wife given the medical treatment she needed. What's interesting is that this wasn't meant to be the last Batman movie of the time. A sequel was pitched, titled Batman Arkham, but it was scrapped, as production was shifted to Return of the Joker instead. The cool part is that the plot for Arkham would later be repurposed for the Batman Arkham Asylum video game. Rise of Sin Tzu. Superman 64 isn't the only video game on this iceberg. There are actually quite a few games tangentially connected to the DCAU, but this one is probably the most prolific. Released on the Xbox, PS2, and GameCube, the story centers around an international warlord that takes over Arkham Asylum from the inside, on the anniversary of the death of Thomas and Martha Wayne. It is a 3D beat-em-up and nothing special. It's no Superman 64, but it's just okay. Beyond League. The Justice League was introduced in the first episode of Justice League when the team decided to form as a way to battle back the White Martian invasion. But as it turns out, the Justice League debuted as a team several years earlier in a future iteration of the team first premiering in Batman Beyond. The team of the future consists of Superman, Big Barda, Warhawk, Cairo Green Lantern, and Aquagirl, with Terry McGinnis Batman as a part-time member, just like Bruce was back in his time as Batman. Because of this statement by Bruce in this Batman Beyond episode, when the Justice League show premiered, Batman explicitly states that he is a part-time member, maintaining that continuity. Grey Ghost. The Grey Ghost is a fictional comic book and TV superhero inside the DCAU that a young Bruce Wayne watched when he was a child. The character served as inspiration for the invention of the Batman persona, and draws heavy inspiration from the popular comic heroes of the 30s and 40s. Most interestingly, the character Grey Ghost is voiced by Adam West, the actor who portrayed the campier 1960s Batman. All in all, this episode is a great tribute and a lot of fun. Watchtower Database. The Watchtower Database is a DCAU-centered YouTube channel that you probably know about if you clicked on this video, but definitely should check out if you don't. They're named after the Justice League's orbital space base from JLU, and regularly delve into all sorts of interesting trivia about the DCAU. Finding out which tertiary media is canon or not, asking awesome questions like, where is Barry Allen? What about the Reverse Flash? Hal Jordan, Jason Todd? A lot of these entries on this iceberg are covered in great depth over on their channel, so definitely check them out if this video tickled your fancy. I want to take a really quick break before we jump into the second half of the iceberg to say thank you for watching. I took a pretty extended hiatus off of YouTube last year. Now that I'm back at it, I'm actually enjoying it for the first time in forever. So if you like what I'm making here and you want to see more of it, please drop a like below and subscribe. It's totally free. You can always unsub later if you feel like it. Okay, thanks again. On to the next tier. Tier 6. Justice League Doom. Another film, this one came out in 2012 and is loosely based on the comic storyline Tower of Babel, where a villain steals Batman's contingency plans for defeating the Justice League and enacts all of them at once, throwing everything into chaos as all the heroes are forced to fight for their lives. The film is not a part of the DCAU and even includes an art style that would later be used in Young Justice, but it was one of the last things Dwayne McDuffie worked on before his untimely passing, and interestingly enough, it includes most of the voice cast from the DCAU Justice League. Kevin Conroy returns as Batman, Tim Daly as Superman, and Susan Eisenberg as Wonder Woman, with Carl Lumbly and Michael Rosenbaum returning as Martian Manhunter and The Flash. But other than the art style, we know this movie doesn't fit into the DCAU for a multitude of story reasons, the most obvious of which is that Hal Jordan is the team's Green Lantern. Harley's grandkids. In the world of Batman Beyond, the Joker is long gone, but his presence is still felt through the Jokers, a street gang of a bunch of punk kids that replicate his iconography through carnival-themed makeup and costumes. Two prominent members of the Jokers are the Didi twins, a pair of redheaded marionette-inspired girls. As the Return of the Joker movie was filled with revelations about Gotham's past, it snuck in one at the very end, when the Didi twins are scolded by their grandma, Harley. Interesting. Brainiac Attacks. Released in 2006 as a tie-in with the live-action Superman Returns, Superman Brainiac Attacks was a film following Clark Kent's latest battle with Brainiac, clearly in the style of the DCAU, with Bruce Timm's designs and everything. That said, even though this looks just like DCAU Superman, the movie does not fit in anywhere into the canon. First and foremost, the voice actors and general personalities of both Lex Luthor and Brainiac are completely different from their S-Task counterparts. The Phantom Zone and Fortress of Solitude are totally unrecognizable, and the head writer of the film, Duane Capizzi, even stated explicitly that it only used the designs of the DCAU and was never intended to be a part of it. The Dark Knight's First Night. This is the name given to the initial pitch animation for BTAS, the very first piece of anything DCAU related that was ever created. It showed off the Bruce Timm art style with moody, expressive animation as Batman battles several criminals atop a building in Gotham City. This short collection of shots would later become the iconic opening to BTAS that plays before every episode. It's definitely a cool little piece of obscure media to check out, seeing all the details that they kept and the ones that they changed. Crisis on Two Earths. Originally titled Justice League Worlds Collide, this 2010 animated movie was going to be the bridge between the end of Justice League and the start of Unlimited, showing us an adventure after Hawkgirl left the League, building the new Watchtower, and Wonder Woman getting her iconic invisible jet. The film never ended up being made, and was eventually repurposed into Crisis on Two Earths, a Justice League story where our heroes battle the Crime Syndicate, alternate versions of themselves from a parallel Earth, including Ultraman, Superwoman, and Owlman. While the film is definitively not canon to the DCAU, the writers confirmed that 95% of the original script made it into the finished product, so this movie is sort of like looking into a DCAU movie that never was. A parallel world, if you will. My shitty jokes aside, this one is great. I highly recommend you check it out if you haven't seen it yet. The Batman and Owlman dynamic is probably my favorite part. Tier 7. Jason Todd Comics. Interestingly, the DCAU jumped straight from Dick Grayson to Tim Drake, while in the comics, Batman had another Robin in between those two, Jason Todd. You probably know Todd from the Death in the Family arc. Jason was killed by the Joker and later brought back as Red Hood, clashing with Bruce. For the longest time, it was assumed that Jason just didn't exist in the DCAU, and the plot of Robin being kidnapped and tortured had been adapted into Tim Drake's experience as depicted in Return of the Joker. In Batman The Adventures Continue comics, Jason first appears in Volume 11, where it's revealed that he was in fact the second Robin in this universe, and though he didn't die in this version of his confrontation with the Joker, he did become completely dedicated to vengeance, just like his comic counterpart. Original JL lineup. The Justice League we see in JL and JLU are different from the classic comic lineup, which included Aquaman, Hal Jordan, and Barry Allen. But the DCAU version was almost even stranger, believe it or not. Originally, it was planned that Hawkman would join Hawkgirl on the team, along with Orion, Green Arrow, and Black Canary. All of these heroes did end up joining the League in Unlimited. But after this original lineup was pitched to Warner Bros., the team was told to include younger members to appeal to children. So a new league was thrown together, one that included Robin, Impulse, the speedster descendant of Barry Allen from the far future, and a gender-bent version of Cyborg, all three of them teenagers. Needless to say, this was a bizarre Justice League team, and I'm very happy we ended up getting the original 7 team members that we did. Kirby Tribute. Dan Turpin was an S-Task character, a member of the Metropolis Police Special Task Force, who occasionally interacted with Superman and helped him battle crime, although the two butted heads because Turpin believed protecting Metropolis was the police's job and not Superman's. Turpin's character was modeled after Jack Kirby, DC and Marvel comic legend that designed a vast majority of the biggest characters in each universe, including the new gods like Darkseid. During Darkseid's invasion of Earth, it was Turpin that helped free Superman and rally Metropolis to fight back against the forces of Apocalypse. Because of this resistance, Darkseid left Superman with one parting gift, disintegrating Turpin with his Omega Beams. It was a powerful scene, made much more poignant during his funeral, where the animators added both DC and Marvel characters created by Kirby in the service, as well as other comic creators. Included in the lineup were Bruce Timm, Paul Dini, Alan Burnett, Stan Lee, Orion, Mr. Miracle, Reed Richards, Sue and Johnny Storm, Nick Fury, T'Challa, Steve Rogers, and Tony Stark. It was a fantastic dedication to Kirby and his legacy, and even though these characters were removed in subsequent airings to avoid copyright disputes, they have been added back in on the Blu-ray releases and the version currently available for streaming on Max. Clone Ivy. When the art style shifted from BTAS to TNBA, there were a lot of notable changes, including Poison Ivy's skin tone becoming an inhuman green, resembling the plants she loved so much. This could be chalked up to a simple stylistic choice, but interestingly enough, it's actually a major plot point. As the comics later reveal, this newly designed Ivy is actually a clone, grown out of vegetable matter to resemble her. This shouldn't come as much of a stretch. We've seen Ivy replicate humans with terrifying plant clones before, but this was a giant twist that the TNBA series never revealed. Of course, this calls into question every interaction Ivy has had throughout the series, including her friendship with Harley. The Zeta Project. This 2001 animated series is a spin-off of Batman Beyond, featuring the titular character, a synthoid robot created by the NSA to carry out assassinations that chooses to stop taking lives. He and his friend Ro travel the world on the run from government agents trying to recover and decommission Zeta. Interestingly enough, this series only ever includes a single DC character, Terry McGinnis as Batman Beyond, who only appears in a single episode. And because Terry was created for the DCAU, this show doesn't depict a single DC Comics character, even though it is part of DCAU canon. For this reason, very few people know that it's actually connected at all. Grodd's psychic manipulation. In Season 3 of Justice League Unlimited, Lex Luthor is recovering from his fusion with Brainiac in the previous season finale, while constantly plagued by the voice of Brainiac inside his head, demanding that he be recovered and re-assimilated. This is a fantastic turn for the character, and the idea that the space Brainiac created for himself in Luthor's mind had some sort of echo? Mwah, chef's kiss, it is such a cool concept. But also in this season, Luthor helps form the Legion of Doom and clashes with other villains for control, including the psychic Flash villain Gorilla Grodd. The two are constantly one-upping each other for dominance over the Legion, and that's where this theory comes in. Perhaps the voices in Luthor's head weren't Brainiac, but Grodd, who was attempting to psychologically manipulate him and drive him mad. Tier 8. Beyond Divorce. In the JLU episode Epilogue, it's revealed that Amanda Waller attempted to recreate Bruce Wayne by overwriting his genetic material on top of a Gotham man, who alongside his wife matched the psychological profiles of Thomas and Martha Wayne. This man, as it turns out, was the father of Terry McGinnis, who ended up becoming the Batman of Neo Gotham. Where this entry gets interesting is that Terry's parents were divorced at the start of Batman Beyond. This seems odd because they're supposed to be the perfect psychological matches of Thomas and Martha Wayne, who never showed any signs of turbulence in their marriage. Of course, there are a plethora of reasons for a couple to split, but it's possible the reason they broke up was because Terry's father suspected infidelity. After all, both of their children had black hair, the genetics of Bruce Wayne, despite the fact that neither of the McGinnises had dark hair. It's likely he thought his wife was having an affair, meaning that Amanda Waller's canceled Batman Beyond project ended up causing a divorce. Batman 75th. 2014 was the 75th anniversary of the character Batman, and as a tribute to the character, an animated short was uploaded to YouTube titled Batman Beyond. It shows Terry McGinnis and Bruce Wayne fighting off an android of the original DCAU Batman that had infiltrated the Batcave. After they destroy it, they're faced with a small army of androids to fight. each one a tribute to a different era of Batman. We see versions of Bruce from Beware the Batman, Brave and the Bold, Dark Knight Returns, Michael Keaton, Adam West, and the original Batman from his debut in Detective Comics 75 years prior. It is a super fun little short that I definitely recommend you check out. Wonder Woman Bootstrap Paradox. Wonder Woman's first appearance as a superhero is in the premiere episode of Justice League. She had not spent any time using the name Wonder Woman or fighting crime before this team-up. That said, in a previous episode of S-TAS, Lois Lane makes a passing sarcastic remark, "Yeah, and I'm Wonder Woman." This seems like an obvious continuity error, and it was most likely that the writers just didn't know Diana would be introduced later in the DCAU. But as it turns out, there is an in-universe workaround for this. In the JL episode, The Savage Time, the League time travels back to World War II to stop Vandal Savage from altering history. Obviously, they interact with and defeat German soldiers, and Diana even has a short romantic fling with Steve Trevor, a US spy behind enemy lines. After the League traveled back to the present, Diana visited Steve in a retirement home, and he remembered her. This means that the League and their actions in the past are historical fact, and it's entirely possible that the name Wonder Woman was spread after this point to describe the superpowered lady that defeated Vandal Savage during the Second World War. This would explain why it's a throwaway line for someone like Lois Lane to use in the present. But more interestingly, perhaps the popularity of the term is what inspired Diana to choose the name for herself during her superhero debut, essentially meaning she was named after her future self. A bootstrap paradox. Alternate timeline Hal Jordan. Jon Stewart is, for a lot of DC fans, their definitive version of Green Lantern, but this is almost entirely because of the DCAU, which greatly popularized him over the, at the time, far more iconic Hal Jordan. It was such a shift that when the terrible Ryan Reynolds Green Lantern movie released, a lot of people thought that that was a race-swapped Jon Stewart. So, to pay a nod to the original Silver Age Green Lantern, during the JLU episode The Once and Future Thing, Jon is briefly blinked out of existence and replaced with Hal Jordan as the League is exploring the future. It is a very short change, and Jon returns not long after, but this was a confirmation that, in a different timeline, Hal was a founding member of the Justice League instead of Jon. Cool detail. Kara In-Zay. In DC Comics, as well as virtually every adaptation, Supergirl is Kara Zor-El, Superman's cousin. But in the DCAU, there was a mandate from DC that stated Kal-El was the only living Kryptonian. To circumvent this, Kara was introduced in the show, but not Kara Zor-El of Krypton. Kara In-Zay of Argos, a sister planet to Krypton. Technically, DCAU Supergirl isn't Kryptonian, just very genetically similar. Instead of Clark and Kara being cousins, it's more like their races are cousins. Weird. Batman Whispers. During the JL episode, The Enemy Below, Deadshot is captured by the League and interrogated about his involvement in the attempted assassination of Aquaman. We see Superman try to get more information out of him to no avail. Then Batman takes over, whispers something to him, and Deadshot immediately cracks, telling them everything. Obviously, this is a cool scene for Batman, but I always wondered, what did he say? I'm assuming something super brutal, like, I'm gonna break all your fingers one at a time. You know, something they can't actually have Batman say on a kid's show. As it turns out, we do know what he said. Kevin Conroy revealed the line was, "I know where you live, Floyd." Tier 9. Agent West. In the Zeta Project, Zeta and Rho are pursued by multiple agents of the United States government, including the red-headed Orrin West, voiced by Michael Rosenbaum. If you recall, this series takes place in the future of the DCAU alongside Batman Beyond. And there happens to be another prominent member of the DCAU with red hair, voiced by Michael Rosenbaum, none other than the Flash, Wally West. What is the probability that Agent Orrin West is the descendant of Wally, who hoped to follow in his grandfather's footsteps by protecting his country? Near Apocalypse of '09. This is an event only ever alluded to twice in Batman Beyond, some sort of world-ending event that was narrowly avoided thanks to the work of Batman in 2009. We know very little about it, only that it was the work of Ra's al Ghul, and interestingly enough, it's public information. We know Ra's has tried countless ways of reducing the Earth's population, so this tracks with his eco-terrorist persona. But with how frequently the world almost ends in the DCAU, for a single particular event to be remembered more than 20 years later is quite the feat. I don't think we'll ever know exactly what he tried to pull, but it's fun to speculate on. Moore's one exception. Alan Moore is an author and comic book legend, the mind behind Watchmen, V for Vendetta, The Killing Joke, countless other classic stories. But if you know anything about Moore, you know he is a grumpy curmudgeon who notoriously hates any adaptations of his work. He's disavowed nearly every film, TV show, or animation based on his work, with one notable exception. For the Man Who Has Everything was a Superman story in Superman Annual number 11, 1985. An episode of Justice League Unlimited with the same name was released in 2004, adapting the story with a few changes, including swapping out the presence of Robin for Wonder Woman. The episode depicts Superman being attacked by Mongol, placing a parasite on him that shows him visions of an alternate life, where he grew up on Krypton instead of Earth. It is a heartbreaking story, one of the best in the DCAU in my opinion, and Moore's one exception. He approves of this adaptation. Justice League: The First Mission. Much like The Dark Knight's First Night, this is a very short animated pitch for Justice League, showing off early designs of the League members and the bizarre lineup I mentioned earlier, including Robin, Impulse, and female Cyborg. If you ask me, this little piece of animation is far less enjoyable on its own than the Batman one, and it's clear that none of its iconography or even the character designs made their way into the series. But that said, it is significantly harder to find in high quality, which makes it more niche. Tier 10. Lobo and GG. In 2000, the WB commissioned 2 online exclusive animated web series, Lobo and Gotham Girls, both based on characters that had appeared in the DCAU. Now, if 2000 seems really early for a web series, yeah, it was, and these definitely show it, with extremely crude animation that was often off-model and featured a multitude of errors. It was clear how little budget these Flash animated properties had. Besides that, the material was far more adult-oriented than the DCAU had been so far, particularly in Lobo. But if you know anything about the character, it's actually very true to the comics. Despite the fact that these 2 web series were originally intended to be a part of the DCAU, the fact that almost none of the talent from the other projects worked on them causes most people to consider these non-canon, but it is up for debate. Forbidden artwork. There were a lot of restrictions on the team behind the DCAU from Warner Brothers and the various networks they worked for. You can't show explicit violence, nudity, children in danger, religion, drugs, alcohol, a whole slew of things that were forbidden. In a bit of a satirical piece, Bruce Timm collected all of these restrictions, breaking every single rule in this drawing of Batman, Joker, and Catwoman. It's pretty funny. I wish that was the end of this entry, but as I've said, Bruce Timm is way too horny. He likes to draw, and there exist a bunch of drawings of DCAU characters performing adult activities together. You can figure out what that means. Obviously, these are all not safe for work. I won't be including any of them here, but they're really easy to find if you really want to. Man, Joker gets really creative with a whoopee cushion, and it's surreal, to say the least. Joker died in Phantasm. At the end of Mask of the Phantasm, the Joker lures both Batman and his lost love Andrea to the abandoned Gotham Fair, which he ends up detonating in a massive explosion. While Batman and Andrea escape, it's never explained how the Joker survived this incident. When we see him again in TNBA, his appearance has drastically changed, with perhaps the biggest shift in appearance of all Batman villains. Except for maybe Poison Ivy. As the theory goes, Ivy and Harley were friends even before Harley left the Joker. It's possible Ivy, as a secret favor, created a plant clone of the Joker to save Harley from her grief after his passing. This would explain why the Joker always manages to survive impossible, deadly situations, including the crossover with Superman in the STAS episode World's Finest, where the Joker is trapped inside a crashing plane surrounded by grenades about to go off. We see the plane explode in the middle of the sky, and even Batman admits that this probably killed him. His return could easily be explained by Ivy creating another clone for Harley. And with the knowledge that Joker lives such a dangerous lifestyle prone to ending abruptly, perhaps she designed the next one to hold its composure if it was killed, not withering into plant matter and giving away the secret to a grieving Harley. It's a fun theory, and even though there are some holes, it's more plausible than me trying to explain how he escaped both inescapable explosions in Phantasm and World's Finest. And besides, we know from Batman Beyond that the Joker loves the idea of returning from the dead. Maybe he already had plenty of practice. Ace's namesake. Perhaps one of the most emotional moments of the DCAU was in the JLU episode Epilogue, where an elderly Amanda Waller recounts to Terry McGinnis why she felt the need to try and recreate Batman by genetically tampering with his family. She tells the story of the Royal Flush Gang and their youngest member, Ace. Ace was a very powerful psychic who had been experimented on her entire childhood, and now, due to an aneurysm, risked destroying countless lives in an enormous psychic backlash. Waller tasked the League with killing her before this happened, but Batman was the one who volunteered, strangely enough. As it turns out, he never had any intention of ending Ace's life. Instead, he let her look inside his head and see that he understood her, what it felt like to have your childhood taken from you, to be a scared little kid. He chose to sit with her, offering comfort while she waited for her end to come. It's a touching story, although being Batman, it would be easy to assume that this moment was just another day in his life of adventure. But we know that this moment stuck with him for decades, long after he hung up the cape and cowl. Even after he retired as Batman, Bruce never forgot Ace. After all, how do you think Ace the Bat Hound got his name? Stay frosty.